Okay, who wants to give a bullet point note of that brilliant expression that Mark just gave us?
I
I've
think
been
So,
taking
it's in the
notes.
video already.
Oh,
It's the part about selling it to the United Church of Christ. I think that part wasn't on there.
I think, yeah, the question was, oh, they sold it. It must not have worked out.
mm-mm.
And seems to me that's a different story. So maybe pick it up from that part.
So when we said we sold it to the United Church of Christ, that was we are partnering currently now with the United Church of Christ in the States, with the national franchise. The United Church of Canada, we both offer the opportunity to the national church as well as to our region, and neither of them could put their head around equity investing. And it's just not a world that they were used to being in, and they were looking for prospectus and numbers and history that this company was too young to really provide. So they weren't able to sort of see where the potential was, what had already happened in the microcosm, and the way in which that would also happen in the macrocosm. But the United Church of Christ, because in the U.S. that entrepreneurial energy and spirit has had a longer history of involvement in terms of the church, they grasped it right away. And so they were keen to come on board. So that's the national stuff. The local stuff, we had bought 2 franchises, which gave us all of Vancouver Island as well as the Gulf Islands, and it was too big of territory. There are lots of reasons why we ended up with both territories, although we intended initially only to have the Southern Island. And so as part of the JLF realignment, and they did this in a number of the centers, and we just voluntarily did it, we broke our franchise of 2 into 5, and then began to look at different ways that we could continue to deliver the services and do what needed to be done, but also sell off portions of it where we weren't really able to give the time, energy, and attention to realize the potential that was there. And then as the Victoria, or the Southern Island one, just continued to grow and grow, it was at a place where the staffing and the growth and the pieces that needed to happen started to be bigger really than my volunteer board could continue to kind of do the work and manage. And so we made the decision that we would look for a buyer for the South Island as well. We still own 1 of the 5 franchises, but we've sold the other 4 since. Our initial investment was $50,000 plus $1,000 loan. We were able to pay the loans out of the operating funds and the proceeds as we've gone along, and we have sold 4 of those 5 franchises, probably combined for somewhere in that area of about $1 million.
Okay.
May I ask what you think was what was driving your success? Is it just whether it was untapped demand, or was it just run so smoothly that people just got the words and wanted to use your service?
So I think it was a
What would
variety of things. Certainly with the congregation being on board meant that we had a lot of free advertising and connecting. And so with the congregation being on board, they really, really quickly either accessed it, as some of the parishioners did, or their friends or family or neighbors or stuff. They would say, you know, I would recommend these guys. We've got some involvement with them. And the quality of care and the model being used, because it aligned with our values and we knew what it was that we were hearing from folks. And the biggest piece was that folks having rotating caregivers and not knowing when they were coming or who was coming were the big complaints. And we set out to create relationships. And in doing that, both the clientele as well as the reputation grew, that people felt like the care they were getting and their loved ones were getting was quote unquote just like family. The other piece that's a hard sell in this business is the keeping of caregivers. Move from place to place, and there's a lot of rollover and a challenge in that. We set out as one of our primary values right away that we would pay what was the living wage in this area. And so while minimum wage at the time we started was $15 an hour, the living wage in Victoria was 21. And so that's where we started with our caregivers, was at the 21. And we took a big hit again about a year and a half ago of about 14% because with COVID and everything that happened and cost of living, the living wage in Victoria took a jump to 24. And so we moved our caregivers, and it meant a loss to us as a congregation, but it felt important to do because it aligned with our values and our sense of, and so that win-win, which is the title of the book, for both the caregivers and the clients, in a sense became a principle for business that contributed to the success, because our caregivers feel a sense of loyalty. They like working for us. They like the continuity. We don't expect them to drive all over town and do 5 or 6 clients in a day. Instead, they know they have a minimum of a 3-hour shift with someone, and they get to build that relationship, and they get to learn about them. And when those clients die, 9 times out of 10, those folks are at their funeral services because they've become like a piece of that family. And certainly I've experienced that with members of the congregation who ended up being palliative and had that care. One of the big challenges in this business is repeat clientele is not so prevalent. Often by the time people are accessing this care, they're moving toward end of life kind of stuff. And so when they're gone, sometimes we'll get repeat by the second family member in a couple, but sometimes it just simply ends and you're starting again. So if you have a 24/7 client that you are servicing and they die, you've got a lot of work to do to replace that income. So that's that ups and downs, and knowing that your flow is changing. But the bigger we got, the more stable that became, and it didn't hit us quite so hard.
So I have a question about the United Church of Canada, that you said you approached them, but they couldn't get their minds around whatever. And so you did this a few years ago. Do you think that now that there is a living example of what this can do, will the process be a little more, not as hard, I should say, or difficult? Because what I think about is how onerous will they make this process if St. Paul, or do you think it will be more onerous if St. Paul's made a decision that this is a way they want to go? And ultimately, whose responsibility it is to approve this a strategy so it's like this?
Yeah.
Is it yours? Is it the church? Is it the
I think I mean, the way our system is built as a United Church, the congregation, quote unquote, is the highest court. And so it has lots of independence about figuring how it's going to do its work and survive, as long as it's doing it within certain kind of boundaries and abilities. I think the whole idea of social enterprise is not new for the church, but social acquisition is a bit new. And certainly doing it on this scale is new. The United Church has been used to doing coffee shops and cafes and you know, those smaller kinds of pieces that are more manageable, that have less risk involved to them. There were lots and lots of steep learning curves, certainly for me, and for our community as a whole as we did this. What was key was making sure in my own personal life that I kept some mentors who were really smart business people in my life that I could pull together and consult with and talk with and think out and strategize with. And as well that we kept on that board for JLF, also entrepreneurial folks whose experience in business knew that the ups and downs and the trials and tribulations when you start something are a normal part of it, and they did not come to it with anxiety, and that was key, to be able to be smart and know where you needed to cut costs and where you needed to kind of rein things in, and where it was okay to say, yeah, this is a part of it. This is a risk. We gotta kind of take and open this next door, and figure that out each way along the line. In terms of the United Church as a whole, for most of that, there was very little they were involved in. As long as we were paying back the loan on the schedule that we had agreed to do, they were happy. Where they had the challenge was when it came to buying the national one. And we saw it as a great opportunity. So did Carla and Rob. But they could not sell their superiors. And I spent hours with the comptroller for the BC region, and he could not get his head either around it. And so in the end of the day, neither of those two bodies decided to invest in the national piece. And so that's whether they would do that differently now, probably because there's a longer prospectus. They can see where the success is. It's the challenge of getting in on the ground floor. And I understand that reticence when there are so many other pieces that feel fragile right now for us as a denomination. So I don't blame them. I'm not angry or disappointed. I just want to know that I'd given them the opportunity. I was not at all anxious that we couldn't find the money in a variety of other places.
United Church of Christ bought in it. They've got about 65%, right?
I don't think it's quite that high. I think it's around 40, but yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they bought in at about $500,000. So.
And the goal is for that to be operating in the States.
And that was one of the reasons strategically to align ourselves with, because that gives us a door to be able to move into the States easier than it would be if we were a wholly owned as a Canadian company. So strategically, it made a lot of sense on lots of levels.
So the Just Like Family was owned by a kind of numbered company set up in BC, or like federally in Canada, or?
From a local franchise place, we set up a numbered company with some arm's length to protect our CRA number and a few other pieces. We spent quite a bit of time doing some legal work and legal research at the very beginning to figure out how to do this and be able to make it work. And there are lots of ins and outs about how that happened, and we've passed that information along to the national JLF. And then the national JLF, I believe, has a holding company and a numbered company. It's quite convoluted the way it had to be constructed in order to do that. And Carla's far better able to explain that to you than I can.
How's
So,
this making sense to you, Deborah? This is newer to you than to some of us now.
I'm still absorbing. Some of my questions is about, my question is around now. You said you have one franchise left with the congregation.
Yeah.
Is that still giving you the sustainability you need? have you branched out doing other things to help with that?
No, we've branched out doing it. That other one, we're looking for an Indigenous partner to take that one over and take that one on. Do you know what a VTB is? A vendor take back?
We are learning
So,
it.
okay, so we're in a vendor take back position with the current South Island. And so that will continue to create some revenue for us. As we continue to investigate what we're going to do now with the principal. We owned 2/3 of that, and the CEO owned 1/3 of it. One of the things that became apparent for us along the way when we did this is the amount of time it was taking for the chair of the board, who was a volunteer initially, who had incredible gifts and skills, that the expectation around that was far too much and taking far too much time. And so we needed to find a way to compensate her in some way, shape, or form. And at that point, the cash flow just wasn't able to be paying the kind of salary that someone with her skills would be. So instead, we did a share agreement with her. So we instead gave her 1/3 of the value of the company, which, you know, continued to then mean that she had huge investment in its success. So it was, again, win-win for each of us. The congregation retained the controlling share and the controlling decisions, but Sarah was benefiting financially from the success of the business as it grew and grew, a lot because of her incredible leadership and skills. So finding those partnerships and finding that sharing arrangement was a critical pivot for us at a certain point along the way.
And I guess you're still a shareholder, right, in the company, so you're still getting profits in some way?
So we still receive 2/3 of the VTB and the process of that, yes.
Okay.
And we will until that deal's completed, which will be 3 years from now.
Yeah.
So we received half of it up front, and the money that we had in the bank for our operating fund, because we had to have, at all times, we had to have $100,000 in our account, because we had about an $80,000 payroll every 2 weeks. And so we had to be able to cover that payroll, and then we would recover it within about 4 days later. But
Okay.
payroll and the billing, mid-month billing, all happened at the same time. And so there was a 4-day lag in there between when we would receive the money back from the client and the caregiver themselves got paid. So when we sold, that money that was there was enough to pay any outstanding liabilities and debts to the various different folks, the fees, the lawyers, all that kind of stuff. So that meant that the sale price really became simply money that we then can reinvest. We also have another social enterprise. We have a thrift store. So
Okay.
Cool.
So in terms of when you started this process, in terms of dollars, what was the total upfront expensive, like cost to set it up?
The upfront cost was the purchase of the franchise itself.
Mhm.
And then having enough money around to be able to pay at that time we had one manager who was the one in charge of hiring folks and meeting clients and doing that kind of stuff. But, you know, it took a couple of months of them making connections and doing those visits and hiring folks, but they still had to be paid through all that period of time. And then the operating capital to be able to meet those caregiver salaries. And that number just kept growing. And some of that we could recover with what our return was. But it does take time. You've got accounting fees, you've got insurance fees, you've got phone fees. You've got, in our case, we leased a car so that the manager would have a vehicle to do the home visits, and that was a better alternative than paying mileage. It was more cost effective for us to lease a car. So there were all those kind of costs to running a business.
You said you got $50,000 as an initial investment plus some loan. You didn't really get any other money from the bigger UCC. It was like within the church congregational money.
Yeah, so the 50,000 came from within the church. At that time, it was part of an amalgamation process. So each of the two congregations put 25 in each. And our initial cost to buy the first franchise would have been less than that 50. So some of that, because we only bought one to start. And so there was some money from that for operating, and then we took out at first a $50,000 loan, and then we took out another $80,000 loan from the United Church Foundation as we started to grow, and we needed more capital to have the operating slush.
So, like every church, there are volunteers. The volunteers from the church are not involved in the business at all. They just do the normal church thing. So Sally can't come and say, I would like to, I don't know, go on a visit or something. It's a business, so it's run along business principle.
That's right. So Sally, as a member of the church, could not do a visit.
Okay.
That would be up to the paid employees to do. So the role that the church had in terms of it is we had a board for it that was made up of 2 congregational members, and then Sarah, who was our CEO, who is a member of Broadview, but was also a third shareholder. So those 3 people, and then the co-lead ministers were advisors to the board. So we also sat on it, but we were not voters on it. And the 2 people who were from the congregation making up the board could not sit on any other governance pieces. So they couldn't have a conflict of interest. Their conflict of interest was only that they had the best interests of Broadview in mind, but they weren't members of the board or the foundation or trustees or any of those kind of things. So that's what one of the things our lawyer said that had to happen is there had to be some element of arm's length for the board.
Okay. And you said Sarah was with the franchise before?
No.
No, okay.
No,
She
Sarah was
talented.
she was the chair of the team of our social enterprise folks. She was a member here and was one of the people I recruited to be on that team as a person who I knew had huge business skills and acumen.
So the congregation's relationship with it became, obviously they cheered it on and they learned about it and they agreed to put the money in, and then they talked it up and they participated and used the services. And
right. So the congregation itself did not make the decision to put the money in. That was a board decision. We didn't go to the congregation as a whole to decide this. We let the congregation know in a celebrative way that we have done this. And the 2 people who were the board members spoke to the congregation and then made themselves available during coffee time to answer questions. Okay. Most of the questions were pragmatic in nature. There was 2 people who were the perennial doomsday folks who, who came and wanted to say, well, have you done your due diligence about X, Y, and Z? Like the fact that somehow there would be nobody on this group of people who would know what they were doing. So they were a bit gobsmacked when we had answers to all of those questions. Yeah, we consulted a lawyer. This is what we know about this. Yeah, we've done this. Yeah, this equity piece. Yeah, that's in place. Yeah, no, we've done the liability. Like the questions they expected to trap us on, they couldn't. And so at the end of the day, they kind of turned their own corner, and But on the most part, the congregation was ready to embrace it. They could see how well it aligned with our values, that it was win-win for both the client and the caregivers, and had potential to create these revenue streams for us. So
Mhm.
So
we probably didn't do a very good job of keep telling that story, however, post-COVID. So when Carla came to speak here in May, there were quite a number of folks who were like, what? I didn't know any of this. So it's finding that balance between just kind of doing your thing and not blowing your horn so much that CRA suddenly wants to pay more scrutiny to you than you want them to, and doing what you need to do. And because we were being successful, we just kind of just kept doing our thing.
When you were owning like 5 franchises, basically the income being transferred to the church was through dividends payment, or?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And our year end was, and we had to set up a Class A and Class B set of shares, which was a whole new learning for me, in terms of how we would do that dividend. We also have a foundation here, and because the rules in BC around private equities and dividends and all those kind of things are make it difficult for a church that's under a federal legislative charity to have such a thing. It's actually our foundation that owns the shares. The dividends get paid to the foundation donates them back to the church. So that's the vehicles we've had to use.
And your franchise is across Canada?
So our franchise is not across Canada. The national thing that we now are shareholders in is across Canada. But the 5 franchises were local to just Broadview, and they were across Vancouver Island. So there's 2 parts.
Yeah. And so I just Googled, and Halton franchise is part of Halton, Niagara, Hamilton at the moment. So it's owned at the moment, but we're learning, right? We're learning, but there's somebody here who owns that. I think Mississauga was for sale. But, anyway, yeah.
Probably the most challenging thing about this business for us is, unlike a cleaning company, if you're a caregiver or it's a snowstorm or whatever happens and you can't get there to clean that business today, and you can say, well, I can fit you in tomorrow or next week, there's no one's going to, there might be inconvenience, but that's about it in that process. When somebody's relying on you to get them out of bed, feed them, toilet them, clean them, it's not an option to cancel the shift for that day. And so, there were times when we were during COVID and some of those early stages of that and snowstorms that, Sarah, our CEO, was out with her 4-wheel drive picking up caregivers and delivering them because the buses weren't running. And, or at times, board members of the JLF board and or Sarah would sub in for somebody because you couldn't leave someone without the resources that they needed. So at those early stages, we didn't have the number of staff to be able to backfill sometimes, and we had to do it. And that was a moral obligation, and was part of the challenge for sure.
I think Oakville's lucky. It's a little bit like Victoria, where we don't get huge snowstorms that shut us down very often.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
But when it happens, man, it really shuts you down because you don't have the infrastructure, right? So, yeah.
The franchise itself doesn't really have detailed rules that you need to abide by, and the UCC also doesn't really touch
So the
as long
UCC
as
has
you're
no
okay.
rules or anything we have to abide by other than keeping our CRA notices
Status
clean.
up.
That's where the United
Yeah.
Church is involved. The franchise itself does have quite a lot of rules
Mhm.
about what needs to happen and what the quality of care, because there needs to be
Mhm.
a consistency of that across Canada.
Mhm.
So, you know, as with any franchise, there are
Mhm.
certain kind of things. But the benefit of a franchise versus starting a business of its own was that it's called AccuCare. So the place in which the records are kept, the way that the employment contracts, that the way the scheduling stuff works, the way that the promotion stuff happens, the way all those kind of things are already done for you. So you're not starting and learning everything from scratch. That was the advantage of a franchise. And more so, since we've taken it over, we've streamlined. When I met with my personal advisors about buying the large franchise itself, I had them look over the documents and the prospectus and stuff, and they identified that one of the biggest risks for us were twofold. One, that there had not been a good job to I've lost the word. When you've made things proprietarized in a way that if someone decided to then break away from you, they couldn't take all of the stuff that you had already provided them to make themselves successful. They would lose that. So the proprietorship stuff had not been done. This person didn't know how to do it. And that what would be key is finding the right CEO at this juncture. And that if we were able to solve those two pieces, that they saw this as a huge winning prospectus. But those were the two flags that my mentors had. And we took those quite seriously. We had already identified the one, and we were working hard on the second.
So you basically get a manual that tells you, do this. If you have staff, you have
Totally.
to
You get training, you get orientation, you get hand-holding, you
taxes,
get mentoring, you get
unemployment.
all those
Yeah.
things. Yeah,
It's
more so than
so
you did
it's
when we did it, we didn't get that in the same, but you get all that now.
Do you pay monthly or like a regular cut to the franchise?
So you pay
Oh.
a royalty fee and you pay a marketing fee as a part of and I think it's the first 3 or 6 months, you don't pay any fees at all to allow yourself to be established. But Carla's better at answering those pieces than I am. But
Plus,
there's
there's
room
a
built in to
franchise-
learn.
Yeah, there's a franchise fair happening in the GTA next month or 2 months or something. So you could go and learn about owning a Tim Hortons, you know? Maybe that's a better deal. Who knows? Um, what's on my mind is that next week we're meeting with our core team and the board is close by to that. And they've been watching the video and they've been learning the links that we've been sending about social enterprise and different groups, Raw Carrot, for example, and so on. But they're brand new. So for the purposes of our conversation next week, and time is of the essence, Mark, I don't know if I even told you, but we are in process of selling our building in Oakville. It hasn't happened yet. It's not signed and done, and that's a whole other story. But we are also working with 3 other United Church congregations on what the future looks like.
Sounds
Slow,
familiar?
but we're the ones who have been working on this for a couple of years with that
Yeah.
same idea of being strong now and doing smart things rather than getting cornered
right.
and shrinking. So
You betcha.
that's what we're doing. And this team is kind of working all the threads at once, right? The
Mhm.
board is amazing and the core team is amazing, but we're pulling a lot of threads at once. So if we were to take time on Tuesday to say, okay, here's what we've learned about social enterprise, and just like family, here's your Cole's notes. What would you suggest?
You want a business plan so that you are really, really clear about what to be expecting when, because you're not going to have instant results in that. So this is not a short-term strategy. this is a long-term strategy. And so, if you're looking for quick wins or quick ways to turn around your investment, that won't be. But from a long-term strategy and with a solid business plan, you can begin to sort of map out what it is that you're looking for and set those milestones. And as in any good business plan, when you reach those moments and those milestones, you do your evaluation and you say, okay, what did we learn? What do we need to pivot? How does that affect the long-term piece in this? With where we know home care is going, worst case scenario is that you might decide 2 years from now you're going to sell the franchise. And unless you've sat on it and done completely nothing, which JLF wouldn't let you do in the first place, you're going to have a return on this investment in some way, shape, or form. It will be worth more in 2 years from now than what it is now. But certainly it's not a short game.
Yeah.
It's a long game.
Thankfully, I think selling is our short game at the moment. That's the big
Yeah.
deal. But
Yeah.
but the rest of it gives us the room for the long game. Am I wrong, Jackie? I think that's
No, if we can get the sale completed and approved and wrapped up in a bow, that would be good, because we will get some flexibility in there. But as you said, it takes a while. You have to talk to the legal people. You have to make sure that you're not offside with Revenue Canada. And more importantly, St. Paul's will have to do the work around deciding what is its goal, and then look at franchise world, for want of a better word, and figure out which one of these align with what St. Paul's is trying to do. And then the question is, do you do an existing one or do you do a startup like you do? And what is the difference, and what will be required for the startup versus buying into one that has an established reputation? Because the risk with franchises, especially new ones, is that they might not take off, right? And you have invested all your time and energy. So St. Paul's will have to figure out, do we want to start a new one and build it from the ground up, or do we want to buy into an existing franchise? Because there are all kinds of franchises out in the world. So those are decisions that St. Paul's has to make and
The
figure
other
out.
piece that you want to ask in there is what aligns with our values? Like, what is it we want to accomplish? Because part of the critique from outside is, why? So if the church is involved in a business and you're creating a profit, how are you creating that profit? And is it consistent and congruent with what it is that you're saying and the other elements of who you are? A Pornhub is a really, really strong investment, but maybe not the best choice from a values alignment place, right?
we have a bunch of guys who would love a place for their pubs and pews group, so they would love to own a brewery. We've talked around that a lot, but it could.
And there's lots of history around monasteries and all those kind of pieces around breweries, and
a couple of them know a lot about that. Yes.
Yeah.
We're an affirming congregation, the first one in the area. We are social justice beyond a lot of our neighbors and sort of leading the way. So aligning with values matters very much to our people. So that will be easy to cut out a whole lot of Pornhubs and OLG gaming and stuff like that. I'm thinking of our group. We've got some numbers people on that group, Jackie and being one of them. And hey, Grace, if you're not doing anything on Tuesday, you could come join us. But we have some smart people on that group. So
and that's key. You know,
Yeah.
you want some,
Yeah.
those folks will be able to do that discernment and be able to name what the risks are and what the promises are. But you want folks who are also able to see where it's important to take risks.
Yeah,
Um,
I liked your statement about not anxious. Some
Not
non-anxious
anxious, yeah,
people is important, yeah.
very important, yeah.
So one of the things we're dealing with is a region that's jumpy. And our region has proven itself to be jumpy, not just with us, but with other folks. And at the
Not,
moment,
not
we're trying-
non-anxious.
not non-anxious, like the opposite of non-anxious. And so the important part of that is that we're supposed to be creating a business plan and a sustainability model and all sorts of stuff. And I'm sure that Jackie's concern is they won't see the long game. And at the moment, it feels like we're sort of held up with that. So what do we do? Knowing this is a long game, what do we do to buy their attention and their confidence? maybe
Well,
that's-
in the same way that you need probably a 5-year sustainability plan, you're going to have a 5-year business plan, and just make that one of the many components. So, you know, I did a demographic spread. I took all of my givers and I broke them into decades, and and then I totaled up what each of those decades was contributing on a yearly basis, and translated that to a percentage wise. And when I put that in front of the board and the congregation, it totally changed the conversation really, really fast. So I think
Yeah.
when you present data and say, look, the business as usual isn't going to work, and we can see without digging too deep all around us where the demise is coming from, with people not taking this data seriously. We are looking at ways to create new income streams. And in the short term, it won't be there. In the short term, we've got these other pieces. But that has to be one element of a multi-pronged approach. We are no longer living in a world where we can rely on any one or two things in order to be sustainable. There have to be multiple prongs, so that, like a diversified portfolio, when one isn't able to perform well at a certain juncture, you're not left vulnerable. You know that the other ones can carry it for a period of time. And so identify what those multiple prongs are, and identify so that they don't have to do it. Anticipate all of their worries and questions. And like we did with our naysayers, have answers ready for them. And so that they're able to say, oh, okay, maybe these people do know what they're doing. Maybe they have done some research. Maybe they do have a plan. And people are more willing to make and do risks with people who feel like they're not doing this from a place of naivety, but they're doing it from a place of knowledge, knowing what the risks are.
Sorry, I have a tape playing in the back of my head about some of the work we've been doing with the region right now and how difficult it's been. Yeah.
We're too used to operating from a place of scarcity, rather than realizing that the gospel invites us to see it as a place of abundance. Jesus never ever moved from a place of this is a sure thing. And so we have been institutionalized in a way in which we're always looking for the sure thing. And I'm not a person who will take unnecessary risks. But I do think it's important for us at times to say, all right, let's do this. A wise business person once said to me, there's no such thing as a good or bad decision in business. You make a decision, you work it to make it, and then you work to make it the right one. And so whatever we do and whatever choices we make, we then have to do the work to make it the right choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've said that a couple of times to our folks who are digging into their pockets for dimes and nickels and said, this is not your failure. This is not on you. You don't have to feel bad about this. This model that worked for 100 years doesn't work now.
Yeah.
We need a new model. And
Yeah, it's sort of like the ones who want to put the tin can out at coffee time for people to collect money, you know, rather than, okay, so if you're gonna 2-bit people to death, you're never gonna get the kind of sizable investment, right? You have to stop thinking in that way, in that model.
luckily our people, they live in Oakville. They know what their house values are worth. They know what housing costs. They know what it costs to replace a roof. And so when we say your dimes and nickels can't fix this now, they get it. They get it. They're sad, but I think they're more excited by the work that we're doing than they are
Yeah.
sad and tired. So, and my dad was a minister at a church where the treasurer had Alzheimer's.
Oh,
So
dear.
yeah, they had a really good bunch of friends who were really good friends of Bob and would help Bob do the books every week. But yeah, you know, it's happening, right? It's
You
happening
betcha.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Any other questions from anybody or?
No,
Not at the moment. Yeah.
it's been
It's
very
just a lot of uncertainty, but very exciting at the same time.
Mark, I
And
so
thank you
appreciate,
for the
yes.
encouraging words and not thinking from the place of a scarcity, even though it's scary and we are,
Yeah.
but we will get the resources and make it work. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like you guys have
Mhm.
started to, I think, gather the right kind of people together and think strategically and realize that this is a critical juncture for opportunity. And again, doing it, as you say, from that place of strength before we get to that place where we have no choice is what's important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got an amazing team and they've held on and kept each other laughing and going through all of this, and it's been really awesome to see. So more to come.
Great.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. We may be in
Mhm.
touch again with more
All
questions.
right.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so
Sounds good.
much.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Okay.